with the 8th house and talking deeply about the 8th house in Rootwork Astrology. For those of y'all checking in, welcome to my humble day. For those of y'all returning, what it is, what's up? You know what I'm saying? My name is Crew, aka Rainy Storm, aka Crew, aka Rainy Storm, checking in. First and foremost, for those of y'all that are tuning in, make sure that you go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and please comment down below and let me know what is sitting in your 8th house as we record this video. Do you have planets in your 8th house? How do they interact with your 8th house? Let's get the conversation going down below in the comments because I love to read y'all's comments. I wanted to start this 8th house astrology series, and we'll eventually move to 9th house during Sagittarius season, because there is something about the 8th house I feel like we've brushed over, but we haven't really got into the thick of it, right? We haven't got deeply into this section or this energy with the chart. And I know when we do talk about this 8th house astrology, or I would say the more hidden subconscious themes of astrology, it always seems that y'all want to know more about this certain topic. So let's go ahead and get into it. What is the 8th house? What does the 8th house symbolize and represent? Well, in modern astrology, we can see the 8th house as the Scorpio house, right? This is the Mars or the Plutonic home of Scorpio, right? We look at this as the rulership, of course, like I said, Mars and Pluto, but we also look at this as like regeneration, death, sex. This has to do with like occult knowledge, taboo knowledge, if you will, as well, in this particular area of the chart, right? This is also where you can see contractual agreements, and not just contractual agreements you would see in the 7th house, but spiritual contractual agreements that you've had when you decided to come into this lifetime, okay? So you can also see this within the 8th house as well. These are even bloodline contracts or agreements that you made in previous past lifetimes or paths that you were on before you incarnated into this lifetime to complete or to finish. You can also see inheritances are located in the 8th house here as well. This is also when we think of inheritances, other people's money, things like that. Sometimes we think of like material gains, which it could be material gains, especially from a death or a wealth transfer of sorts. But this is also where you can see your gifts, different gifts that you possess as well, that were inherited and also passed down from a previous or somebody down the bloodline. Okay, for example, maybe you have a specific clair or psychic ability that was passed down from your great grandmother, right? And then you've inherited this gift, and maybe it's something that was hidden in, you know, as a child or when you were younger and things like that. And as you get older, these gifts start to come out, and then you start to look down your bloodline and things. And you're like, wait, such and such had this gift. Oh, such and such also had this gift as well. You know, so you can definitely see this within this 8th house energy here. Now, we can also see different spiritual practices, healing modalities as well. I know we talk about death and rebirth in this house, or regeneration or the regenerative process that happens here in the 8th house. And death can be something that is physical, but death can also be something that is like having a spiritual death, or you can have a death and change of perspective in this particular house as well, if you see. This is where you also see, I know we talked about spiritual practices, esoteric practices as well here. You can also see different maybe parts of yourself that die in this particular house. Like maybe you resonated with a certain part of yourself very young, and then as you get older, and it doesn't have to be like young and older, but maybe you resonate with a certain parts of yourself, and then you go through 8th house transit where you have different aspects hitting your 8th house, and you go through a complete regenerative process of like, you know what, I used to believe this, but you know what, actually I don't believe this anymore. Actually I don't resonate with this anymore. I actually resonate with this instead. So you can also see this here with the 8th house as well. You can also see practices that harm you, like things that you hold on to, because remember, 8th house is things that are hidden. It's not necessarily like the 12th house per se, but these are things like the psychological mental capacities that you hold on to, right? We're going to get into the root work soon, but you can see the 8th house also too as like surgeries or open surgeries, especially when it has to do with the head. Now I know that Aries is the energy that kind of rules over the head, but because Scorpio rules like this, the mental psyche. Yes, it's a water sign. Yes, it's fixed energy, but it rules over the ability to be able, with precision, to focus on something so hard, or focus on something, or attune to something so hard that, or with precision, like even sometimes where it can become completely and extremely excessive, right? That it warps, eventually can warp your mind, or also create very strong things that you can receive into your reality, or I would say attract things that can also come into your reality as well here with the 8th house. It's a very saucy house. I mean, for some, you know, it's kind of scary for some. People do not like talking about, there's a lot of people who do not like talking about the 8th house because they get scared. They're like, wait, does that mean somebody's going to die? What does it mean? Like, okay, well, if I'm about to have the transit, like, it get deep, y'all. It get deep, all right? So we have this here. We can also see old wounds that resurface from childhood. Yes, we can look to 4th house as well, of like old wounds, going back to like those ancestral wounds, the roots, the patterns and things like that. But I feel like 8th house is where, this is where it's like a in between. Like you've gone from the 8th house and you know, hit this right part of the chart all the way up into the 8th house, and this is like the make or break, right? And it's not that you don't get many chances and different ways to be able to, you know, I guess harness this energy and things, but I think the 8th house takes you through that process of, you know, like we were talking about the death in rebirth process of that. Just like, is this something that you want to hold on to, or is this just something that you want to, you know, break down and eventually get rid of, you know, in a sense. Now I will say this, it doesn't necessarily just have to be traumatic wounds. This can also be open wounds. Like we were just talking about surgeries. So this is where, let's say you get into like a car accident or something like that. You can see what part, depending on what zodiac sign that you have in that chart, to see what that could potentially affect. Of course, it's gonna go into, you know, different parts and things, but I'll say this. So when I got into the motorcycle accident earlier this year, I have Libra in my 8th house, right? So Libra, one of the things that Libra rules is the skin, right? Even though it was on my neck, which you can see usually for Taurus, which Taurus is my 3rd house, so I was, you know, on a vehicle, which 3rd house rules is like a vehicle. I was going from one place to another, the 3rd house, and then it affected my skin. You can see still, like the different skin, or the healing of the skin. You can still see the wound from the thing. So just like that. So it affected my skin, where I had an open wound on my skin, and then my skin had to go through a regenerative process of healing. So that's just an example of what you can see with, if we're talking about like zodiac signs. So if you go to, which we'll talk more about as we go through this series, but we can also talk about just in general, which I'll call like a rootwork holistic astrology, but you can see this in medical astrology of like what parts of the skin or what parts of the body that zodiac sign particularly affects in that. So you can definitely see this here as well too. You can also see this as chronic health concerns as well in the 8th house if you come here, like the physical body. You can see what part of the health can also be illuminated and also radically transformed as well here too. I remember when I had the South Node was going through my 8th house, and it's clearing up now, but that was what was that, last year that we went through that transit, and I was getting mosquito bites on my body more than often, and I was like scratching and peeling the skin, and so now I have like these little bites, little wound bites, little tiny wound bites on me that I've been clearing up with what you call it, butters and salts and things like that. So this is what you can see. So going through the process of, you know, the wounds opening up and then going through this healing process of, I know it sounds crazy. I know. I just, the mosquitoes be attacking me. They like my blood. And I be eating sweet stuff too. So they be trying to come after me and all that kind of stuff. So this is something that you can see here as well. Now, when we talk about the energy of Scorpio in itself and what it rules in terms of like this root work, specifically on the body, we can see anything that has to go from the nose to the bladder. We can also see this from the anus as well too. Scorpio also rules the blood, right? You can even look into your blood types when we talk about this Scorpio energy, like what type of blood, O, A, B, you know, things like that. And we'll get into that in another video, especially with like blood types and things, because that was a little bit more of the westernized way of how people related to the blood, but there was other ways that people also traced the blood, especially for pregnancies, but we'll get into that when we get into the Cancer house. And it wasn't just blood, it was also your piss, right? And plants as well here too. We can see this for the appendix. We can see this also for the abdomen as well, the lower body, the lower section of your stomach where your abs are. You can see this also again for like psychological and mental capacities of what people are internally going through, especially in the mind, right? You can also see the genitalia as well with the Scorpio energy, the different parts that are affected there, any illnesses. You can see this with organs and organ mutilation as well. And then again, illnesses, accidents, you can see this here. Now, any health conditions, whether long-term or something that is inherited, you can see this as well in the 8th house. Issues around surgery or surgical procedures also are happening in the 8th house, depending on like what aspects are hitting your 8th house, especially if you're about to go into some type of procedure. You can see whether or not that it would be a good time to have that procedure or not, right? When you have transits, especially specifically to the 8th house. And I know sometimes we would think of like the squares, so squares being something that form tension in the 8th house, but sometimes, and I've seen this happen myself with my own 2 eyes, sometimes the squares can also be just as much as like a sextile or a, trine to this particular 8th house, can also be a indicator that the surgery will go well. It just depends on what is aspecting this particular house. Like I said, I've seen this before in with real life with someone I know who went through a brain surgery actually for the eyes and things, for a tumor with the eye, and they were having squares to their 8th house. And at first I was really, really worried because the squares that was happening with their 8th house, but then when I looked deeper into the chart, I was like, oh, okay. It'll go well, it'll go well because of the other aspects that were happening, particularly to this particular chart. And it was something that had to happen immediately too. So there's that. Now, we can also see how you process your trauma in the 8th house. Are you more avoidant processing your trauma? Do you try to run away? I don't know why I'm thinking in my mind of like 8th house Pisces energy. Sometimes can escape through different alcohol, substances, things like that. You can see with the Pisces energy here. Not always, but you can definitely see that here. And also, like, I would think like a Pisces 8th house, which I'll do soon through all the houses, the different zodiac signs through all the houses. I'll do a video about that, like how that also can manifest within the 8th house here as well too, the different zodiac signs here. Psychological tension also too as well through the physical body, especially like I said, depending on like what zodiac sign is also in the 8th house as well. And also even the what I named, especially with the Scorpio energy, transit in relation to that Scorpio energy of the different body parts as well here too. You can also see this as the reproductive system within the 8th house. You can see this also as the detoxification. You can also see the 6th house as well as the 8th house as I feel like the detoxification starts in the 6th house, and then the secretion, or where it comes out, the final, the ending, the transformative process, it goes out in the 8th. It actually reminds me when you eat something, right? 6th house, well, actually it's really 2nd house, because 2nd house has a lot to do with what you eat. But the 6th house is kind of like when it actually goes into your body, and it goes into the different parts of your stomach, you know, it goes down the throat, into your body, your stomach, and then the 8th house is where it all comes out at, you know, where you shit it out at, where you bury it out at. You can see that in the 8th house as well here too. Okay, so this, like I said, going back to like the deep layers of transformation, this is where you get support for that. So you can see people who are like psychologists, therapists. You can also see this in the 8th house. You can also see this in the 7th house as well, depending on what's there. But specifically with the mental and psychological capacities, this is where you can see shamans, my phone, where you can see like spiritual healers. All that stuff would come through in this 8th house. And it doesn't have to necessarily be the person with that exact same zodiac sign, but this could be somebody who has the traits of that particular zodiac sign. Or even, I would even say 7th house is like where you would meet them, and 8th house is actually where you would, the type of healing that you would get, you know. Going back to my 7th house, I think, or my 8th house with the Libra energy that I was saying, I definitely healed through art, right? I definitely healed through painting, artwork, you know, things like that. You could see, particularly with this planet. So, you know, making things beautiful, making my environment, my space beautiful, things like that. But art is a conduit specifically for me that helps me process my emotions, or the things that I'm going through deeply. Eventually I'll dabble back and forth into music as well too, and things like that. But as an example, that's what you could see here. And then, of course, spiritual transformation, and then the hidden aspects of life here. You want to look for any planets here. If there are no planets, you want to look for the rulership. So, for example, again, I have Venus in the 8th house, which is Libra, which Libra rules. Venus rules Libra, so I can look to Venus and then see where in my chart Venus is. And for me, Venus is in my 7th house. So I can look to that particular place. So you want to see a rulership. Let's say you have Aries in the 8th house. So Aries is ruled by Mars, and then you would look to see where Mars is in your chart. You want to go to Jupiter, depending on if you're going to use Pisces also too as a rulership or not. But you can use, if you have Pisces or Sagittarius, we'll say in the 8th house, it's ruled by Jupiter, ancient ruler Jupiter for Pisces, but also Neptune. So you can see where those are in your chart, and you can see how that particularly will affect you here as well. So that's a little bit about the root work. Before I go, there's one thing I do want to say, especially when we talk about numerology in 8th house. If we talk about the number 8, this is where you talk about the death and rebirth cycle of the number 8, right? So you go through that transformation, you go through that Phoenix rising energy, which usually has to do with Scorpio, right? And then you go back into the ground, and then you bury, and you come back up, and you do the process over and over and over and over again, right? Until you break the cycle and move, right? Because I think about the number 8, and how if you twist it and you turn it and you pull the two pieces together, you break the cycle, and then another cycle comes back, and then you break that cycle, and another cycle comes back in again. So you could definitely see that with the 8th house. So definitely let me know down in the comments down below, y'all, what is in your 8th house. Do you have any planets in the 8th house? How do you resonate with your 8th house and things? If there's anything that you want to add, especially when we talk about root work, this also has to do with ancestral, gifts and things that you can see here with the 8th house. And if there's any ancestral gifts that might have been passed on from a previous cycle or previous generation that you had, you can also let me know down in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Make sure you share this with a friend as well too. And I will definitely see y'all soon for the 8th house astrology, and we'll be talking about the different signs through the 8th house before we jump into the 9th house of astrology. So I already know what it is. It's a rainy sun, checking in, checking out, without a doubt. I'll see y'all in the next one. Deuces.